The war room smelled of old leather and pine smoke scents Dante, ironclad, had known since boyhood, when his father held councils in this same chamber. 20 years later, the maps had changed, but the weight pressing against his shoulders felt identical. Beta Liam stood across the oak table, silver threading through his dark hair, the scars on his knuckles testament to 4 decades of warfare. The intelligence report lay between them like a loaded weapon. Liam's finger traced a route through Montana territory, his voice carrying the gravel of too many campaign seasons. 500 fighters minimum. Marcus isn't running entertainment, he's building an army. Every prisoner who survives 20 bouts gets conscripted. We've confirmed training rotation supply chains from 3 black market dealers and enough silver ammunition to outfit a battalion. The other council members shifted in their seats. Elder Silas leaned forward, his weathered face twisted with concern that might have been genuine or might have been theater. Silas had opposed Dante's ascension 10 years ago, had questioned every reform since, but pack law demanded his seat at this table regardless of personal friction. "We strike now before he's ready." Silas's words came fast, too eager. "Waiting gives him advantage." Dante kept his gaze on the map. The Rockies sprawled across the paper territorial boundaries marked in fading ink. His kingdom, if you could call it that, stretched through Colorado into Wyoming, hard-won land his grandfather had bled for during the border wars. Marcus controlled Montana approaches neutral territory, forming a buffer neither side had violated in 30 years. An unprovoked attack would shatter that treaty, would turn allied packs against ironclad faster than Marcus could manage with propaganda alone. "We need justification the council recognizes." Dante straightened, meeting each pair of eyes around the table. "Attack without cause makes us the aggressors. Marcus is counting on us making that mistake." Liam nodded, once the gesture of a man who taught Dante everything about leadership worth knowing. "Since when does defending our territory require permission?" Silas's challenge hung in the air between them, testing. "Since we want allies when Marcus moves. Politics isn't weakness, it's strategy. Anyone who can't see that difference shouldn't be planning wars." The silence that followed carried weight. Dante had learned early that an AlphaKing commanded through presence or as much as words. His father had ruled through fear and gotten a silver blade in the spine from his own beta. Dante chose a different path, though some nights he wondered if mercy would kill him just as surely. "The prophecy still bothers you." Liam's voice dropped low enough the others couldn't hear clearly, a private observation between men who'd fought together since Dante was 15 and stupid enough to think courage alone won battles. Dante's jaw tightened. "White wolves are extinct. My grandfather mounted the last pelt in the archive hall 40 years ago. You were there." "I was." Liam's eyes held something Dante couldn't quite read. "Watched him gut a female, and her mate kept the cub alive for 3 days trying to breed her before she died of injuries." "Your grandfather wasn't a good man, Dante. History shouldn't forget that." The words landed like stones in still water. Dante's lineage carried stains he spent every day trying to wash clean, reforms and justice and mercy that half the kingdom viewed as dangerous weakness. The prophecy Liam mentioned was old pack legend, the kind of myth elders whispered when they wanted to undermine young kings. When the last white wolf rises, the true alpha's reign is secured or shattered. Convenient words for challenging legitimacy. If Marcus believes it, he'll hunt any white wolf that surfaces. Liam gathered the maps, his movements economical and practiced. "Better we don't give him ammunition." "Agreed." Dante dismissed the council with a gesture, watched them file out until only Liam remained. His mentor crossed to the window overlooking training yards where young warriors ran drills in morning cold, their breath fogging in mountain air. "You're going to Blood Moon territory anyway, aren't you, tomorrow? Reconnaissance, only 4 guards disguised as visiting nobility. Marcus has invited me to his fighting pits 3 times in the past year. Time I accepted his hospitality. And if it's a trap, then you'll be a better king than I was." Dante allowed himself a half smile, the kind that never reached his eyes anymore. "Get word to allied packs. Quiet inquiries about support if Marcus moves first. Don't commit. It's just test the waters." Liam clasped his shoulder, the grip of a man who'd carried Dante's wounded body off 2 battlefields and never once asked for anything in return. "Don't get yourself killed playing spy. The kingdom needs you more than it needs intelligence." After he left, Dante stood alone in the war room where his father had planned campaigns that left hundreds dead and nothing resolved. The map showed boundaries but couldn't capture the cost of holding them, the weight of ordering men into situations half wouldn't survive. Leadership meant carrying that weight anyway, meant standing when exhaustion screamed to quit, meant being the man others could follow even when the path led straight into darkness. He'd see Marcus's operation firsthand, gather the evidence needed to move openly, and return before the week ended. Simple reconnaissance. He'd survived worse. The wolf inside him stirred restless in ways it hadn't been for years. Dante ignored it, attributed the sensation to pre-mission nerves, and began preparing for a journey that would unravel every certainty he'd built his reign upon. Arya's hands were steady as she cleaned the blade hidden in the seam of her thin mattress, the movement automatic after 4 months of practice in confined spaces. The cage stank of unwashed bodies and fear 10 prisoners crammed into steel bars designed for livestock transport. Above them, the arena floor creaked under the weight of crowds gathering for tonight's entertainment. She could hear Marcus's voice over the speaker system welcoming distinguished guests with the smooth charm of a man who'd perfected lying until it became indistinguishable from truth. Elena huddled in the corner, watching with eyes that had seen too much and stopped hoping for anything except quick deaths. The older woman had been here 8 months, survived by being invisible, by never causing problems, by accepting that this cage was her coffin and only timing remained uncertain. Arya had learned her story in fragments, former army medic captured during a supply run through neutral territory, sorted with the other broken things deemed worthless except as blood sport. You're doing it again. Elena's whisper barely carried over the crowd noise. That thing where you move like someone who's been trained. They'll notice eventually. Let them notice. Arya kept her voice flat, continued working the blade with movements that spoke of muscle memory earned through repetition. I'm not here to survive, I'm here to hunt. That man you drew, the one you keep asking about. What did he do? Killed my family. Arya slid the blade back into its hiding spot, the motion smooth and practiced. 8 years ago, Hunter Commander Victor Reed led a team through Wyoming backcountry, found a pack that hadn't bothered anyone in 3 generations and slaughtered them for pelts. I was 20 away gathering supplies, came back to bodies and blood and Reed's signature carved into the den wall. He works with Marcus now. I've tracked him for 8 years, and 4 months ago, I finally pinned down his location. So I let Marcus's raiders capture me, let them throw me in here, and I've been patient. Tonight, I stopped being patient. Elena's face had gone pale. You're insane. Even if you get close to Reed, Marcus will kill you. Maybe. Arya stretched, feeling the coiled tension in muscles that had spent too long pretending to be weaker than they were. Or maybe I kill him first and Marcus second, and I walk out of here before anyone understands what happened. You're serious. I've been serious for 8 years. Everything else was preparation. The cage door rattled open before Elena could respond. Guard Riker stood there, keys in one scarred hand expression, carrying the casual cruelty of a man who enjoyed having power over helpless things. The scar across his throat marked him as a survivor of challenges he shouldn't have won, pack politics written in old violence. Your turn, little ghost. Marcus wants to impress his royal guest tonight. You're fighting Crusher. Try to make it entertaining before he kills you. Arya rose smoothly, stepped through the door without resistance. Riker grabbed her arm, fingers digging into muscle, and she let him play the part of terrified prisoner while memorizing the positions of the 3 guards between here and the arena tunnel. She'd mapped this facility in 4 months, knew the rotation schedules, the blind spots, the weak points where a sufficiently motivated prisoner could vanish into Montana wilderness before pursuit organized. But not tonight. Tonight, she needed to be seen, needed to draw attention from the one person in that crowd who could either help or destroy her plans. The AlphaKing had finally accepted Marcus's invitation. If half the whispered stories were true, Dante Ironclad was nothing like his grandfather, commanded loyalty through respect, rather than fear, and might actually listen if she could survive long enough to warn him about the army Marcus was building in these blood-soaked pits. The tunnel smelled like copper and fear, generations of violence soaked into concrete. Other fighters had carved prayers into the walls, desperate pleas to Moon Goddess or any power that might intervene. Arya had stopped praying 8 years ago, when prayers proved less useful than training, when she'd found an ex-Marine living in a Wyoming cabin who taught her that survival required skill, not hope. The arena lights hit like physical force, blinding after the dim holding cells. 50 feet across sand over stone walls rising 15 feet to keep fighters contained, while spectators watch from tiered seating. 500 wolves packed the stands, their bloodlust palpable, the collective hunger of predators denied their nature by civilization and seeking proxy violence. Arya's eyes adjusted, found the royal box immediately. Dante Ironclad sat beside Marcus, and even from across the arena, Arya felt the impact of his presence. Power radiated from him in waves that made every wolf in the building subtly orient toward him, instinct recognizing absolute dominance. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, pale blue eyes scanning the arena with the attention of a tactician rather than a spectator. He wore simple clothing that somehow looked more regal than Marcus's gaudy display, the confidence of a man who'd proven himself so thoroughly he no longer needed external validation. Their eyes met across the distance. Something electric shot through Arya's chest. Recognition that bypassed conscious thought and went straight to the wolf she'd kept suppressed for 8 years. Her animal side screamed mine with a certainty that shook her, threatened the control she'd maintained through discipline and necessity. She'd heard stories about mate bonds, dismissed them as romantic fiction, pack elders used to justify arranged partnerships. Standing in blood-soaked sand, while a king stared at her with dawning shock, Arya understood the stories hadn't captured even a fraction of the reality. Dante's expression shifted from mild interest to something that looked almost like horror. He leaned forward in his seat, every line of his body gone tense, his gaze locked on her with intensity that made her skin prickle. Why was he reacting before she'd shifted? She appeared human, weak, unremarkable, unless the opposite gate opened and Crusher entered the arena. The fighter stood 7 feet tall in human form, muscles layered over a frame that suggested bare ancestry somewhere in his bloodline. Scars covered every visible inch of skin, testimony to 15 months of survival in these pits. 43 opponents dead by his hands. They kept him half-starved between fights, channeling his rage into violence that kept crowds returning, kept Marcus's profits climbing, kept the machine running on blood and suffering. Marcus's voice boomed through speakers, addressing Dante with false hospitality. Honored King, tonight, we present a special exhibition. Our champion, Crusher, against a human prisoner. Let's see how long she survives. The crowd erupted in cheers, bets changing hands, everyone eager to watch something helpless, torn apart for their entertainment. Arya recognized the psychology violence against the weak. Let them feel powerful, let them pretend they weren't trapped in their own ways, that they controlled something, even if that something was just deciding whether to cheer for fast death or slow suffering. A gong sounded somewhere, the ancient signal that civilized rules no longer applied. Crusher shifted mid-stride, his body transforming into a massive hybrid form that should have been impossible wolf head and claws bare torso, and power something his bloodline had produced through generations of careful breeding. He charged across the arena with deadly intent, jaws open, clearly planning to end this quickly so Marcus could move on to more competitive entertainment. Arya ran, not from panic but from tactics, creating distance while she calculated angles and options. The crowd loved it, their laughter washing over her as she scrambled across sand, appearing to be nothing more than desperate prey extending the inevitable. Crusher was playing with her, could have caught her already, but drew out the chase, enjoying her fear. Except Arya wasn't afraid. She was counting steps, memorizing his patterns, identifying the slight favor he gave his left leg where old injury hadn't healed properly. Every fighter had weaknesses, gaps in their technique, habits that became predictable under pressure. Crusher relied on overwhelming power, expected opponents to freeze or break, had never learned to adapt when someone refused to cooperate with their own death. He lunged, jaws snapping shut inches from her leg. Arya stumbled, fell hard on the sand, rolled to avoid the next attack. His weight crushed down on her breath, hot against her face, teeth far too close to her throat. The crowd screamed approval, standing now wanting to see the kill. 8 years of hiding burned through Arya like wildfire. 8 years of suppressing her wolf, of living as something less than whole, of pretending weakness, while power coiled unused inside her. She'd promised her mother with her dying breath to never shift, to never reveal what she was, to survive, even if survival meant denying herself. That promise had kept her alive through poverty and hardship and constant vigilance. But her mother hadn't anticipated this moment, hadn't foreseen a king staring at her with recognition, hadn't understood that sometimes staying hidden meant dying for nothing. Arya had spent 8 years preparing for revenge, and she couldn't get revenge as a corpse. She'd spent 4 months infiltrating this operation, and intelligence died with her if she let Crusher's teeth find her throat. She made the choice in a heartbeat that felt like eternity. Her wolf surged up to meet her power that had only grown stronger during its long suppression, exploding outward with force that took Crusher completely by surprise. The shift tore through her partial transformation that let her keep human tactical thinking while gaining animal weapons. Claws erupted from her fingers, white as snow gleaming in the arena lights, and she drove them into Crusher's exposed throat with the precision her marine instructor had drilled into her for 2 years straight. The hybrid stumbled back, shock written across his features. Arya twisted, used his momentum against him, threw his massive form aside using leverage and technique he'd never encountered from pit fighters who only knew raw aggression. She landed in a crouch, claws extended, and for the first time the crowd fell silent, because her claws were white, not ivory or cream or gray, pure white, unmarked, impossible. Arya had kept her wolf suppressed so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to be whole. Power flooded through her every sense, sharpening strength she'd denied herself suddenly available. She was still human-shaped, still thinking with human tactical awareness, but her hands were weapons and her instincts screamed to finish this threat before it recovered. Crusher shifted fully, apparently deciding overwhelming force was the only answer. The brown-gray wolf that emerged was enormous, scarred, deadly. He charged again, learning nothing, expecting power to overcome skill. Arya met him halfway, human agility combined with supernatural strength, and the fight that followed was nothing like the execution Marcus had planned. She didn't have military training as a wolf, but she had it as a human, and this halfway state gave her both toolkits. She used his charges against him, redirected his power, targeted weak points. The injured leg, the blind spot on his left, the ribs that hadn't healed properly from an old break. The crowd had gone, whoa, this wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something they'd never seen. A prisoner fighting like she'd been trained for war. White claws that meant impossible bloodline technique that spoke of experience none of them could explain. Dante Ironclad was on his feet, both hands gripping the railing of his box, pale blue eyes blazing with something between shock and possessive fury. The word that tore from his throat carried alpha command that froze every wolf in the building. Stop! Crusher froze mid-lunge, instinct, overriding intention, 500 years of pack hierarchy demanding obedience when an alpha king spoke. The entire arena went silent, even the bloodthirsty spectators responding to power that transcended entertainment and reminded them what real dominance felt like. Arya straightened slowly, claws still extended, white and gleaming and undeniable. Her chest heaved from exertion, blood marking the sand, some hers, most Crusher's, none of it fatal, but all of it proof this hadn't been the slaughter Marcus advertised. She met Dante's gaze across the space between them, saw recognition there that went beyond surface appearance, felt the mate bond slam into place with certainty that shook her foundation. This wasn't the plan. She'd intended to survive, to get noticed, to find a moment alone where she could warn Dante about Marcus's army. She hadn't anticipated feeling her soul recognize its other half, hadn't prepared for the way her wolf howled with joy at finding what 8 years of loneliness suddenly revealed had been missing. Dante vaulted over the railing, dropped 20 feet to arena sand without apparent effort, supernatural grace making the distance trivial. Every wolf watched as their king crossed the blood-soaked ground toward a prisoner who should have been dead, whose white claws marked her as something legend claimed was extinct, whose existence changed calculations in ways none of them could yet comprehend. Marcus stood in his box expression, cycling through shock, fury, and rapid calculation. Arya could see the wheels turning behind his eyes, weighing options, searching for angles. He'd just lost whatever entertainment value he'd planned, but gained something potentially more valuable if he played this correctly. Dante stopped 10 feet from Arya, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough to not crowd. His voice carried command, but also something else, something that might have been wonder if kings allowed themselves such vulnerable emotions. I felt you the moment you entered this arena, before you shifted, before anyone saw what you are. My wolf recognized yours through suppression, through disguise, through everything. You're magnificent. Arya forced her claws to retract the effort harder than it should have been after 8 years of keeping everything locked down. Her voice came out rough from disuse, 4 months of deliberate silence, ending in words she'd never planned to speak. "Who are you, Dante Ironclad? AlphaKing of Ironclad Pack. And your mate." The mate bond between them hummed with electricity, with certainty, with inevitability that terrified Arya more than Crusher's teeth ever had. She'd spent 8 years trusting no one, depending on nothing except her own skill, surviving alone because alone meant no one could betray her. Finding her mate in an arena designed for death felt like the universe's cruelest joke. "I didn't ask for a mate." Her words came out sharper than intended defense mechanism engaging automatically. "I know." Dante's expression softened slightly, though his posture remained alert, aware of the 500 witnesses in the political powder keg this moment represented. "But ask or not, the bond exists, and I'm getting you out of here. The only question is whether you'll come willingly, or if I need to claim you by King's right and carry you out." Marcus's voice cut through, amplified by his microphone and carrying false apology. "My lord, I had no idea she was anything beyond human. If I'd known she was your mate, she never would have been." Dante turned, and the look he gave Marcus would have frozen a bonfire. "You would have what exactly treated her better, not caged her, not forced her to fight for profit. Tell me, Marcus, what justifies any of this?" His gesture encompassed the arena, the cages visible through tunnel openings, the entire operation Marcus had built on suffering. "Entertainment has always been. This isn't entertainment. This is torture for profit." Dante's voice dropped lower, more dangerous for his control. "I'm taking her. Anyone who objects can take it up with me personally, and I promise you'll regret that conversation." His warriors appeared at tunnel entrances, moving with precision that spoke of training and preparation. They'd been ready for trouble, had positioned themselves during the fight, and now formed a protective cordon between Dante and anyone who might be stupid enough to challenge an Alpha King's claim. Arya watched the political theater unfold, understood she'd become a chess piece in a game she hadn't chosen to play. But chess pieces could make their own moves if they were smart enough, and she hadn't survived 8 years by accepting other people's plans without question. "I'll come." Her words cut through the tension, drew every eye. "But not as property, not as some claimed prize. I'll come because I have information you need, King Ironclad, and because staying here accomplishes nothing." Clear, something that might have been respect flickered across Dante's face. "Crystal, you're not property, you're your mate. I heard you the first time. Don't make me regret this." "I'll do my best." He moved closer, and Arya's instincts screamed both to run and to lean into him, the mate bond pulling while 8 years of learned wariness pushed back. Dante seemed to sense the conflict, kept his movements careful, non-threatening, despite the power radiating from him. "I need to establish the claim publicly so no one questions my right to take you. That means I'm going to touch you. Just my hand on your shoulder." "Acceptable." Arya nodded, once braced herself for contact. When Dante's hand settled on her shoulder, the mate bond surged into fuller existence, golden warmth flooding through her chest. Recognition so profound, it brought tears she refused to shed. Every lonely year, every hard choice, every moment she'd wondered if she'd survive to see. Morning suddenly felt like it had been leading to this impossible moment. Dante's eyes closed briefly, his hand tightening on her shoulder, and when he opened them again, they blazed with possessive certainty that should have terrified her, but instead felt like the first safety she'd known since her family died. He turned to face the crowd, his warriors, Marcus, every witness to this circus. His voice carried absolute authority, the kind that bent reality through sheer force of will. "This wolf is mine by right of mate bond. I'm taking her into my custody. Anyone who objects can take it up with me personally. Anyone who tries to follow or interfere will be considered an enemy of the crown and dealt with accordingly." No one moved, no one dared. An Alpha King claiming his mate was sacred, inviolable, and Dante's power was such that even wolves high on bloodlust and greed knew better than to challenge him. They moved as a unit toward the tunnel, Dante keeping his hand on Arya's shoulder, his warriors forming a protective formation around them. The crowd parted instinctively, pack hierarchy asserting itself, everyone recognizing they'd witnessed something that would be discussed for years. Arya caught sight of Reed in the shadows, the hunter who'd killed her family, standing among Marcus's advisors. Their eyes met, and Reed's expression shifted from confusion to recognition to calculation. He'd spent 8 years hunting for a white wolf pup, who'd vanished, and now she'd reappeared in the last place he'd expect, claimed by an Alpha King, suddenly untouchable. She memorized his position, his stance, the way he moved. 8 years of hunting had taught her patience, and patience had brought her within striking distance of the man who'd destroyed everything she'd loved. Being claimed by Dante complicated her plans but didn't eliminate them. She'd find a way to read eventually. She always did. They passed through tunnels that reeked of blood and suffering, past cages where prisoners watched in silent shock. Arya wanted to stop, to free them, to burn this entire operation to ashes and salt the earth where it stood. But timing mattered in warfare, and right now she needed to survive long enough to deliver intelligence that would dismantle Marcus's army before it marched. One of Dante's guards opened a door to the outside world. Cold Montana air hit Arya's face, winter bite that felt like freedom after 4 months of recycled arena atmosphere. Horses waited in the darkness beyond, along with more warriors maintaining perimeter security. These weren't ceremonial guards, they were combat veterans moving with the efficiency of men who'd survived situations that killed others. Dante paused at the threshold, turned to face her. "Can you travel, or do you need medical attention first?" "I can travel." Arya's voice came out steadier than she felt. "But I need to tell you something before we go further. I wasn't captured by accident. I let Marcus's raiders take me. I've spent 4 months gathering intelligence on an army he's building using these fighting pits. 500 trained fighters, minimum military-grade equipment, in a timeline that puts him moving within weeks. You need to know what you're facing." Dante studied her for a long moment, and Arya could see the tactical mind behind those pale blue eyes, processing information, recalculating assumptions, adjusting strategy. "Then we'll talk while we ride. My territory is 2 days from here, and I want distance between us and Marcus before he decides mate bonds are less sacred than white wolf pelts." The journey north toward ironclad territory unfolded in careful stages each hour, putting more distance between Arya and the cage that had held her, each mile stripping away the prisoner role she'd worn for 4 months. Dante had offered her a horse, but she'd refused, needed to move. On her own legs, needed the physical exertion to burn off the adrenaline still coursing through her system. The mate bond hummed between them, growing stronger with proximity, but remaining unacknowledged by spoken agreement. His warriors maintained professional distance, giving space while staying alert for pursuit that never materialized. Marcus was many things, but not stupid enough to chase an Alpha King who'd made his claim public. Whatever plans he'd had for a white wolf, they died the moment Dante purchased her from the arena. Political calculations would be happening. Now alliances shifting, new strategies forming to account for variables no one had predicted. They stopped at dawn to rest the horses and allow Arya to recover enough energy to shift back to human form. The transformation left her dizzy and exhausted. 8 years of suppression didn't vanish in a single night, and her body protested the sudden freedom with muscle aches and bone-deep fatigue. One of the warriors provided a cloak without comment, averting his eyes with respect that jarred against 4 months of brutal treatment. Dante was waiting when she emerged from the trees, standing near the edge of their camp and staring back toward Montana with an expression she couldn't quite read. Fury warred with calculation on his face, the look of a man processing information he wished he didn't have. "How much of what you told me is verified?" His question came without preamble, tactician taking priority over mate. "All of it." Arya wrapped the cloak tighter against morning cold. "I spent 4 months mapping that facility, memorizing guard rotations, tracking supply deliveries, and eavesdropping on conversations Marcus didn't know prisoners could hear. He's got 500 fighters trained to military standards, enough silver ammunition to outfit 2 battalions, and connections to 3 black market dealers who've been running weapons through neutral territory for the past year. The fighting rings aren't about profit anymore. They're about recruitment. Win 20 bouts and you get conscripted into his army. Refuse and they kill your family. He's built a machine that turns desperation into soldiers." Dante's jaw tightened. "And his target, you. Specifically your kingdom and your legitimacy as Alpha King. He's been building political alliances, whispering about weak leadership and dangerous reforms, positioning himself as the strong alternative. The army moves within 6 weeks unless something changes his timeline. Why infiltrate alone? Why not bring intelligence to me months ago? Because I had my own target in that camp." Arya met his gaze directly, refusing to flinch from the truth. Victor Reed, commander of the Hunter Syndicate that killed my family 8 years ago. He works with Marcus as military advisor. I've been tracking Reed for 8 years, and 4 months ago, I finally pinned down his location. So I let myself get captured, positioned myself where I could observe and strike when opportunity presented. Then you showed up and claimed me before I could complete my mission. Dante was silent for a long moment, and Arya could practically hear the gears turning in his tactical mind. You're telling me you're an undercover operative who's been playing prisoner while gathering intelligence for a personal revenge mission, and I just extracted you from the middle of your operation. That's an accurate summary, yes. He laughed sharp and bitter. Fate has a twisted sense of humor. My mate is a spy with a death wish who let herself get thrown into fighting rings to hunt the man who murdered her family. I don't have a death wish. I have a purpose. There's a difference, is there? Because from where I'm standing, your plan involves significant probability of death, and you executed it anyway. My plan involved calculated risk professional training and 8 years of preparation. Arya's voice hardened. I've survived things that would break most people, King Ironclad. I'm still standing because I'm good at what I do, not because I'm lucky or reckless. Reed killed my parents, my siblings, my entire pack. 23 wolves slaughtered for pelts and profit. I was 20 years old away gathering supplies, came back to bodies and blood and nothing left of the life I'd known. So yes, I spent 8 years tracking him. Yes, I infiltrated Marcus's operation to get close. And yes, I would do it again because some debts can only be paid in blood. Dante's expression shifted anger, fading into something that looked almost like understanding. Who trained you, those moves in the arena that wasn't self-taught? Ex-Marine I met in Wyoming 3 years after my family died. Former Force Recon retired to a cabin in the mountains, took one look at me, and apparently decided I was worth saving. Spent 2 years teaching me everything he knew about combat survival and intelligence gathering. Died of a heart attack 6 months before I tracked Reed to Montana. He would have told me this plan was stupid. But you did it anyway. I did it anyway. Because Reed doesn't get to live freely while my family rots in unmarked graves. Because justice matters even when it's inconvenient. Another long silence. Dante moved closer, and Arya forced herself not to step back, not to show the wariness 8 years had beaten into her bones. He stopped within arm's reach, close enough that the mate bond flared between them, golden warmth that felt like coming home, and terrified her precisely because it felt so right. I won't lie to you, Arya. The mate bond complicates everything, your mission, my politics, the war with Marcus that's coming, whether we're ready or not. But here's what I know. You're the most capable person I've encountered in a decade of leadership. You have intelligence I desperately need, and you're my mate whether either of us plan for it. So I'm proposing an alliance. You share what you know about Marcus's operation. You train with my warriors. You help me dismantle the threat he represents. In return, I give you resources, protection, and eventually, when timing's right, I help you get Reed. Arya studied him, searching for deception and finding only the exhausted honesty of a man who'd learned that lies were more trouble than truth. What makes you think I want your help with Reed? Because revenge is easier with allies, because Reed's protected by Marcus's army, and because the mate bond means we're stronger together than separate. You can reject it, push me away, maintain your independence. But tactics are tactics, and pretending we're not mated doesn't change strategic reality. The logic was sound, even if Arya hated admitting it. She'd survived 8 years alone through necessity, but alone also meant limited resources, limited reach, limited ability to affect large-scale change. Dante was offering partnership from a position of strength rather than demanding submission from a position of power. The difference mattered. I'll come to your territory, I'll share intelligence, I'll train with your people and help plan Marcus's defeat. Arya's words came measured, each one a conscious choice. But I'm not accepting the mate bond yet. I don't know you, don't trust you beyond tactical necessity, and I won't promise anything I'm not certain I can deliver. If that's a problem, it's not. Dante's interruption was gentle but firm. Trust is earned, not demanded. You've survived by being careful, by not relying on anyone except yourself. I respect that. So here's my promise. I'll prove I'm worthy of the bond. Prove I'm different from whatever you expect from an AlphaKing. Prove you're safe with me. Take whatever time you need. I'm patient. Somehow those words affected Arya more than any declaration of possession or demand for submission could have. Dante Ironclad spoke like a man who understood that real partnership required choice, that forced bonds broke under pressure, that patience was strength rather than weakness. It didn't erase 8 years of learned wariness, but it cracked the door open just enough to let possibility enter. They traveled for 5 more days through territory that gradually shifted from Montana plains to Colorado mountains, elevation climbing as they moved deeper into ironclad lands. Arya watched Dante interact with his warriors, observed how they responded to orders with respect rather than fear, how he made decisions that considered consequences beyond immediate gain. Beta Liam rode beside them much of the journey, the older man's scarred presence, a constant reminder that warriors aged only if they survived, and survivors learned lessons written in blood. On the third night, Liam found Arya checking weapons by firelight, the ritual of maintenance, something her Marine instructor had drilled into muscle memory. The beta sat across from her without asking permission, his movements economical and unthreatening. You fought well in that arena. Liam's observation came casual, but his eyes held the sharpness of a man who missed nothing. Military training shows. What branch? I wasn't military. Just lucky enough to find someone who was willing to teach. Former Force Recon, you said. Those men don't take students casually. He saw something in you worth saving. Arya continued cleaning the blade she'd been given, keeping her hands busy. He saw someone angry enough to be dangerous and smart enough to be trained. Gave me tools to channel rage into purpose. And has that purpose kept you warm at night? Kept you safe? Given you anything beyond survival? The question hit harder than Arya expected, exposed the hollowness she'd been ignoring for 8 years while pursuing Reed. Survival meant existing, meant continuing, but it didn't mean living. She'd forgotten what joy felt like, what connection meant, what it was to trust someone with vulnerability instead of constantly maintaining walls. I survived. That was enough. Was it? Liam's voice carried no judgment, just the question of a man who'd seen too many warriors mistake endurance for victory? Or were you just waiting to die while pretending to live? Before Arya could answer, Dante called for Liam some question about the next day's route. The Beta Rose paused before leaving. He's a good king, better than his father, better than his grandfather, better than most men I've served. You could do worse than giving him a chance. After he left, Arya sat alone with her weapons and her thoughts, the question echoing in the silence between heartbeats. Had she been living or just postponing death? The distinction seemed academic, until she considered it, honestly acknowledged the emptiness that survival-focused existence had carved into her center. She'd been functioning operational, effective, but hollow. Purpose without connection, mission without meaning beyond revenge. The mate bond tugged at her awareness, Dante's presence a compass point she couldn't ignore, no matter how much distance she maintained. He'd kept his word about not pressuring her, had given space while remaining available, had treated her like an allied operative rather than claimed property. Every interaction built evidence that maybe possibly he was different from what experience had taught her to expect from alphas, with power. They reached Ironclad Fortress on the evening of the 6th day, and Arya's first sight of Dante's kingdom stole what breath exhaustion had left her. The fortress sprawled across mountainside, massive walls rising from living rock architecture that blended defensive practicality with aesthetic beauty. 1,000 pack members called this home, their lives visible in lit windows and smoke rising from chimneys and training yards and marketplaces, and all the infrastructure that supported community rather than just survival. Dante guided them through gates that opened at his approach, guards saluting with crisp efficiency that spoke of discipline without fear. Pack members gathered as word spread of the AlphaKing's return, their curiosity palpable when they saw the white wolf running beside his horse. Whispers followed their path through fortress streets, speculation building about who she was and what her presence meant. Dante took her directly to the royal residence, bypassing crowds and questions that would come later. The building rose 4-story stone and timber construction that had weathered centuries, windows overlooking valley approaches that would give advance warning of any threat. Inside, warmth radiated from fireplaces, tapestries, covered stone walls, and everything spoke of power wielded with restraint rather than excess. He showed her to quarters that took her breath away, suite of rooms larger than anywhere she'd lived in 8 years, windows with mountain views, furniture that spoke of craftsmanship and care. A bed dominated one room, soft and clean, and nothing like the thin mattress she'd endured for 4 months. A bathing room connected to the bedroom, complete with a tub large enough to submerge in luxury she'd forgotten existed. These are yours. Dante stood in the doorway, giving her space to process. You're free to move throughout ironclad lands as you wish. I'll assign guards for your protection, but they'll maintain distance unless you need them. You're not a prisoner here, Arya. You're my mate and potentially my Luna. Act accordingly. He left before she could respond, the click of the door closing behind him, somehow louder than it should have been. Arya stood alone in quarters designed for royalty, her mind struggling to reconcile 4 months in a cage with this abrupt reversal of fortune. From prisoner to potential queen, in less than a week defied processing required mental adjustment she wasn't certain she could make. She moved through the room, slowly touching expensive fabric and running fingers across carved wood, half convinced this was elaborate illusion that would shatter when she stopped believing in it. The bathing room mirror showed her reflection, gaunt from 4 months of minimal food, bruised from recent fighting, scars marking 8 years of hard living. She looked like someone who'd survived rather than thrived, which was accurate if unflattering. The bath called to her with siren promise of hot water and soap and the chance to wash away 4 months of grime. Arya filled the tub, stripped away clothing that should have been burned rather than washed, and sank into heat that made every muscle simultaneously relax and scream. She stayed until the water cooled, then stayed longer because no one was timing her, because luxury after deprivation felt almost painful in its intensity. Eventually, she dragged herself out, found clean clothing, laid out on the bed, practical rather than fancy size to fit her frame someone had planned ahead. She dressed slowly, exhaustion catching up now that adrenaline had fully faded, 4 months of constant vigilance taking their toll. A knock at the door interrupted her collapse toward the bed. Arya tensed automatically, hand moving toward a weapon she no longer wore. 8 years of learned wariness refusing to acknowledge she might actually be safe. It's Liam, the beta's voice carried through wood, gruff but unthreatening. Dante sent me to check if you need anything before tomorrow. Arya opened the door, found the older man standing with professional distance, his expression carefully neutral. What's tomorrow, War Council? You've got intelligence Dante needs, and the sooner we act on it, the better chance we have of countering Marcus before he moves. Get some sleep tonight, eat breakfast, then we'll gather in the strategy room, and you can tell us everything you learned in those 4 months. The reminder that her value here was tactical rather than personal shouldn't have stung, but it did anyway. Arya nodded acknowledgement, started to close the door, then paused. Liam, how long have you known him? Since he was 15 and stupid enough to think courage alone won battles. The beta's expression softened slightly. Watched him grow from an angry kid into a good king. He's not perfect, makes mistakes, same as anyone, but he tries. That's rarer than you'd think in men with power. After he left, Arya finally allowed herself to collapse onto the bed, soft and clean, and everything a cage hadn't been. Sleep should have come easily, but her mind wouldn't stop processing, wouldn't stop replaying the week's impossible events, wouldn't stop feeling the mate bond humming beneath her awareness like a second heartbeat. She'd gone from hunter to prisoner to mate in the span of days, her carefully laid plans torn apart by variables she'd never anticipated. Reed remained untouched, Marcus's army still prepared for war, and she'd gained an AlphaKing mate who offered partnership instead of possession. Nothing made sense. Everything had changed, and Arya had no idea whether she'd made the right choices or catastrophic mistakes. Tomorrow she'd present intelligence that could prevent war or accelerate it depending on how Council responded. Tomorrow she'd begin integrating into a pack after 8 years of deliberate isolation. Tomorrow she'd start proving she was more than her bloodline, more than her tragedy, more than the broken thing Marcus had tried to destroy in his arena. Tonight she was just exhausted, just overwhelmed, just a woman who'd survived when survival should have been impossible and wasn't certain what came next. The mate bond pulsed once warm and reassuring, and Arya finally let herself acknowledge that maybe possibly she wasn't alone anymore. The thought terrified and comforted in equal measure, 8 years of loneliness suddenly visible in contrast to connection she'd never expected to find. Sleep claimed her eventually, deep and dreamless, the first truly restful night she'd experienced since her family died, and set her on the path that led to an arena in Montana and an AlphaKing who saw past her scars to the warrior beneath. Dawn broke over ironclad fortress with mountain clarity, the kind of cold that burned lungs and sharpened focus. Arya stood in the training yard watching 20 warriors run drills, their movements synchronized through years of practice efficiency that spoke of military discipline rather than pack hierarchy theatrics. Beta Liam had summoned her an hour before sunrise with instructions that left no room for negotiation. Elite Guard trials began immediately. Her intelligence briefing to War Council would wait until she proved herself worthy of their respect. Gamma Cole approached across packed Earth, 30 years old, with the cocky confidence of a man who'd won more fights than he'd lost, and expected this morning to follow that pattern. Scars marked his forearms where silver had burned testimony to battles survived, and his grin carried the challenge of someone who'd heard stories about arena fights, but doubted reality matched legend. The other warriors formed a loose circle, their attention shifting from morning drills to the spectacle about to unfold. Arya recognized the test for what it was: political theater designed to establish pecking order, to determine whether the Alpha King's mate deserved respect beyond her bloodline and bond. She'd expected this, had prepared for it during 8 years of training that taught her reputation meant nothing without demonstration. Hand-to-hand first blood or submission. Cole stripped off his shirt, despite the cold displaying muscle earned through constant work. No claws, no shifting, pure skill. You good with that? Arya shed the jacket someone had provided, rolled her shoulders to loosen muscles. Still recovering from 4 months of inadequate nutrition and recent combat. Works for me. They circled each other, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd studied multiple fighting styles and integrated them into personal methodology. He feinted left, testing her reactions, evaluating speed and defensive instincts. Arya didn't bite, kept her guard high, waited for him to commit to something real, rather than probing attacks. The first genuine strike came: fast jab toward her face, followed immediately by leg sweep, attempting to take her off balance. Arya blocked the chow, saw the sweep coming, and used his extended leg as leverage to drive her knee into his exposed ribs with force that emptied his lungs in a surprise gasp. She followed through with an elbow toward his temple that he barely deflected, then created distance before he could grapple. Cole's expression shifted from cocky to focused, recalibrating his assessment. The watching warriors murmured among themselves, odds, apparently adjusting in real time. They engaged again, faster now, Cole abandoning the testing phase and committing fully. He was good, years of experience, evident in his technique, in the way he chained combinations and adapted when initial attacks failed. But Arya's Marine instructor had drilled her for 2 years straight, had beaten defensive instincts into muscle memory, had taught her that fighting wasn't about strength or speed alone, but about reading opponents and exploiting microscopic gaps in their technique. Cole relied too heavily on his reach advantage, telegraphed his power strikes fractionally before committing, and favored his right side in ways that suggested old injury to his left shoulder. Arya cataloged these weaknesses while defending, waited for the opening she knew would come, then struck with precision that bypassed his guard entirely. She caught his extended wrist, used his momentum against him, and executed a throw her instructor had made her practice 10,000 times until it became instinctive. Cole hit the ground, hard air, driven from lungs already taxed by earlier strikes, and Arya followed him down with knee on chest and hand cocked for the strike that would draw first blood. Yield. His word came out, breathless but clear, acknowledgement given without hesitation. Arya released him immediately, offered a hand. He accepted after brief consideration. Cole rose, rubbed his ribs where her knee had landed, and the grin that split his face carried genuine respect rather than performative courtesy. Damn, you fight like you've been doing it since you could walk. Had a good teacher. Arya kept her tone neutral, refused to make this moment about ego or dominance displays. Just technique and practice. The warriors erupted in approval, the kind of genuine response that couldn't be faked. Lieutenant Sarah stepped forward, next a woman in her late 20s whose reputation with bladed weapons had reached even the fighting pits where Arya had gathered intelligence. The challenge in her eyes carried different energy than Cole's test, not questioning competence, but measuring it against her own considerable skill. Silver Blade's sparring rules. Sarah drew 2 practice weapons from the rack, their edges dulled, but weight and balance authentic. Unless you need time to recover, Arya accepted the offered blade, tested its balance with movements that revealed familiarity. I'm good. The weapons trial proceeded with deadly grace, silver gleaming in morning light, as both fighters probed for advantages. Sarah possessed the fluid economy of a true specialist, every movement purposeful, her blade work exhibiting decades of dedication condensed into technique that bordered on artistry. She was better than Arya, possessed more experience and refinement, but the gap was closer than either had anticipated. They danced across the training yard, blades ringing when they connected, both women pushing hard enough to test limits without crossing into genuine danger. Sarah scored first touch, a nick on Arya's shoulder that would have been fatal in real combat. Arya returned the favor 30 seconds later with a thrust that stopped millimeters from Sarah's throat, acknowledgement that either fighter could have ended this if stakes were real. They continued until Sarah called halt, both breathing hard, sweat cooling rapidly in mountain cold. The lieutenant's nod carried Warrior's approval, respect earned through steel rather than words. You've got foundation. Sarah sheathed her practice blade with the casual competence of someone who wore weapons like most people wore clothing. Train with us regularly and you'll develop finesse to match your fundamentals. The tactical trial came last, Liam presenting a scenario that tested strategic thinking rather than physical prowess. Mock target requiring infiltration guard patterns provided team of 5 available objective to retrieve intelligence and exit without casualties. Arya studied the problem for 10 minutes while the watching warriors waited, then presented a plan that utilized the terrain features Liam had described, exploited predictable guard rotation gaps, and included contingencies for 3 different failure modes. Liam listened without interruption, his scarred face revealing nothing until Arya finished. Then he turned to the assembled warriors with expression that might have been satisfaction or might have been vindication. That's a textbook special operations approach. Professional grade, nothing wasted accounts for Murphy's Law. He faced Arya directly, and something in his eyes suggested this trial had carried more weight than the physical ones. You think like someone who's planned real missions with real consequences? Where'd you learn trial and error? Mostly error. Arya refused to elaborate, kept her instructor's memory private. The old Marine had taught her more than tactics. He'd taught her that planning prevented casualties, that details mattered, that arrogance killed more operators than enemy action ever managed. The elite guard accepted her then not as their alpha's mate or as curiosity defined by rare bloodline, but as a warrior who'd proven herself against their standards and met them without excuses or special consideration. Cole clapped her shoulder with the casual familiarity of packmates. Sarah offered training schedule for advanced blade work, and the others integrated her into their formation with the seamless efficiency of professionals recognizing competence. Dante watched from a balcony overlooking the training yard, his presence subtle enough most warriors wouldn't notice, but obvious to anyone who knew where to look. Arya felt his attention like physical pressure, the mate bond transmitting satisfaction and pride. Through connection, she was learning to interpret, despite never having experienced its like before. Liam climbed the stone steps to join his alpha, leaving Arya to pause to field questions from warriors curious about arena fighting and pit tactics. The beta's voice carried just far enough for supernatural hearing to catch fragments. She's exceptional. Haven't seen natural talent like that since your father, and she's got discipline he never bothered developing. Dante's response came quieter, words Arya strained to hear. She's more than exceptional. She survived 8 years alone in conditions that would have broken most people, and she's still standing, still fighting. That takes something beyond skill. The prophecy weighs on you. Liam's observation carried no judgment, just statement of fact between men who'd known each other long enough that pretense was wasted effort. Every day, if the old legends are true, if her survival actually validates my claim to leadership, then her death would destabilize everything we've built. Marcus knows that. Reed knows it. Half the kingdom probably knows it by now. She's not just my mate, she's a political symbol, whether either of us wanted that burden. Then protect her. Give her resources, give her purpose, give her reasons to stay beyond mate bond obligation. She's a weapon, Dante. Point her at targets and let her do what she's trained for. I intend to. Dante's voice hardened with decision. War Council convenes in 2 hours. Time she understands exactly what she's become part of. The strategy room occupied the fortress's central tower windows, providing 360-degree views of approaches, while thick stone walls prevented eavesdropping. Maps covered every available surface, territorial boundaries marked in ink that tracked decades of political shifts, supply routes and defensive positions, and vulnerable points cataloged with military precision. 20 wolves gathered as afternoon sun slanted through eastern windows. Dante's inner circle, the men and women who'd helped build his kingdom from the wreckage his father's death had left. Elder Silas occupied his traditional position at Dante's right hand, the 60-year-old's face carrying skepticism he had worn since Arya's introduction that morning. Traditional faction leaders flanked him wolves who'd served three kings and viewed change with suspicion, earned through witnessing reforms, fail spectacularly. Across the table, progressive faction members clustered near Liam and Sarah Younger wolves, who'd embraced Dante's vision of leadership through justice rather than domination. Arya stood at the room's periphery present, but not yet integrated her tactical mind, cataloging exits and defensive positions out of habit impossible to break after 8 years of constant vigilance. Dante had positioned himself at the table's head, his posture relaxed but attention sharp, the contradiction of a leader comfortable with power but never complacent about its exercise. Let's begin. Dante's words cut through murmured conversations with casual authority. Arya spent 4 months embedded in Marcus's operation gathering intelligence. Everything she'll share has been verified through our own reconnaissance where possible, and her tactical assessment aligns with every indicator we've tracked independently. Listen carefully, ask questions, but understand the threat is real, and timeline is shorter than we'd prefer. Arya stepped forward, placed herself where everyone could see, and began the briefing she'd mentally rehearsed during sleepless hours. She described Marcus's facility in clinical detail: cage configurations, guard rotations, fighter recruitment pipelines, training regimens that transform desperate prisoners into soldiers, willing to die for promises of freedom or revenge. She outlined supply chains connecting 3 territories, weapon caches hidden in neutral zones, and the financial network that funded operations too expensive for pit-fighting profits alone. The numbers painted a picture council members couldn't ignore. 500 trained fighters minimum, potentially 600, if recent recruitment efforts had succeeded. Military-grade equipment, including silver ammunition, body armor, and communications gear, that suggested Marcus had connections extending beyond traditional pack networks. Timeline indicating coordinated assault within 6 weeks target obviously ironclad territory, with intent to destabilize Dante's rule and install Marcus as dominant power throughout the mountain territories. Elder Silas interrupted before Arya finished, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent in war councils. You expect us to accept intelligence from someone who conveniently appears claiming mate bond to our king, providing information that justifies preemptive military action? This could be elaborate deception designed to manipulate us into aggression that destroys our political standing. Arya met his challenge without flinching, had anticipated exactly this objection from the moment she'd entered the room. Everything I've told you can be verified through reconnaissance. Send teams to the locations I've identified, watch the supply routes I've mapped, count the fighters I've described. I don't need you to trust me, Elder. I need you to trust your own observations. Convenient answer. Silas's expression hardened, but verification takes time we may not have if your timeline is accurate, which creates pressure to act on faith rather than evidence, exactly what skilled intelligence operatives exploit. Then verify the claims you can verify immediately and make decisions about the rest based on risk assessment. Arya's tone sharpened patience worn thin by political maneuvering when tactical realities demanded action. Marcus is building an army. That's not speculation. That's observable fact your own scouts can confirm within days. Whether you believe my timeline or my motivations is secondary to acknowledging the threat exists and requires response. Liam spoke before Silas could respond, his voice cutting through rising tension with the authority of someone who'd earned respect through blood rather than politics. I sent teams to 3 of her identified locations while she was sleeping last night. They reported back an hour ago. Supply depot, exactly where she said, guard patterns matching her description, weapons cache containing silver ammunition in quantities that support her assessment. The intelligence is solid. The pronouncement shifted council dynamics immediately, Silas's faction losing rhetorical ground, while progressive members leaned forward with renewed attention. Dante allowed the moment to settle, let council absorb implications, then spoke with the measured calm of a leader who'd already made decisions and was now building consensus around them. Marcus moves in 6 weeks. We have three options: wait and defend and strike first, or force his hand through strategic manipulation. I won't order preemptive attack without justification. The Allied Council recognizes which eliminates striking first. Pure defense cedes initiative and advantages his larger force. That leaves option three. What manipulation? Sarah's question voiced what others were thinking, tactical minds already working through possibilities. We leak false intelligence suggesting ironclad vulnerability, reduce garrison supply problems, leadership distraction. Make Marcus think attacking now rather than waiting offers overwhelming advantage. He moves early with incomplete preparation. We're ready for him and we have clear justification for response since he initiated the hostilities. Elder Silas leaned back, calculation replacing skepticism as he processed the strategy. Risky. If he sees through the deception, we've revealed our awareness and lost surprise advantage. If he doesn't, we fight on our terms with moral and tactical high ground. Dante's gaze swept the council. I'm not asking for unanimous agreement, but I am asking for support. Anyone opposed to this approach needs to speak now. Silence answered him, the kind of absence that signified consent without enthusiasm. Warriors accepting leadership decisions even when uncertainty remained. Arya watched the political theater unfold, recognized Dante's skill at building coalition through inclusion, rather than decree at making others feel heard while steering toward predetermined conclusions. His father had ruled through fear and died badly. Dante ruled through consensus and had survived 10 years in position that killed most occupants within 5. Council broke into working groups, each assigned specific preparation tasks. Sarah would coordinate defensive preparations, Cole would handle false intelligence dissemination, Liam would manage Allied pack communications, and various others received assignments that played to their strengths while ensuring everyone contributed to collective effort. Dante caught Arya's eye as the room emptied, subtle gesture requesting she remain. When they were alone with only Liam and Sarah as witnesses, he approached with careful distance that acknowledged her continuing wariness. You did well, not just the intelligence, but handling Silas's challenge. He'll test you again probably multiple times, but you've established you won't be dismissed easily. I don't care about his approval. Arya's response came automatic defensive mechanism engaging without conscious thought. I care about stopping Marcus and finding Reed. Those goals align with keeping you alive, which means they're my goals too. Dante moved to the map table, traced supply routes with one finger while speaking. Reed's our wild card. He's valuable to Marcus as military advisor, but expendable if keeping him risks larger objectives. We need to separate him from Marcus's protection. Create opportunity for you to get answers without walking into army-sized response. You're assuming I want your help with Reed. I'm assuming you're smart enough to recognize solo operations against protected targets usually end badly. Dante looked up, pale blue eyes holding hers with intensity that made the mate bond flare between them. I'm not trying to control your revenge, Arya. I'm offering resources to improve success probability while reducing mortality risk. Use them or don't, but they're available. The offer landed differently than expected, felt less like manipulation and more like partnership between equals, who shared tactical interests despite personal complications. Arya's Marine instructor had drilled into her that pride killed operators, that accepting help wasn't weakness, but intelligence, that lone wolves died while pack members survived through coordinated effort. What did you have in mind? Training with my elite guard for the next few weeks. Learn our tactics, teach them yours. Build unit cohesion that makes combined operations feasible. When we move against Marcus, and we will move, you're embedded with the strike team. Reed will be there, will create opportunity, and you'll get your answers. But not as solo operative, as part of coordinated assault with backup and extraction planned in advance. The proposal made tactical sense, even if it required surrendering independence she'd maintained for 8 years. Arya studied Dante, searching for hidden agendas and finding only the exhausted pragmatism of a leader managing multiple crises simultaneously while trying to keep everyone alive long enough to see victory. I'll train with your people. I'll integrate into your operations. But when I face Reed, that conversation happens alone. No witnesses, no interference, just him and me and 8 years of questions. Agreed. Dante extended his hand, and after brief hesitation, Arya accepted the gesture. His grip was firm without being crushing, calloused from weapon work. and the contact sent mate bond electricity up her arm with intensity that made them both pause. He released her hand, carefully stepped back to restore distance. Welcome to the team. Weeks blurred together in pattern of training, planning, and preparation that consumed every waking hour. Arya integrated into Elite Guard with efficiency that surprised everyone except Liam, who'd apparently anticipated her adaptability. She ran drills with Cole until they could coordinate attacks through gesture alone, sparred with Sarah, until blade work became conversation requiring no words, and absorbed tactical doctrine that had kept ironclad warriors alive through conflicts that killed less disciplined forces. The physical demands proved welcome distraction from emotional complexity surrounding the mate bond. Dante kept his promise about space, never pushed for acceptance or acknowledgement beyond what she volunteered, but proximity made ignoring connection impossible. They shared meals where conversation ranged from strategy to philosophy, walked fortress grounds where he showed her kingdom infrastructure with obvious pride, and trained together in sessions where supernatural strength met tactical precision in combinations that left both satisfied and frustrated by what restraint prevented. Cole became friend faster than Arya had thought possible, his easy humor and complete lack of judgment creating space where she could relax fractionally. He'd survived his own traumas, family killed in territorial dispute, childhood spent as refugee before Dante's father conscripted him, and recognized in Arya someone who understood that survival left scars invisible to casual observation. You're getting better at not flinching when people approach from behind. Cole's observation came during water break after a particularly brutal hand-to-hand session, his tone carefully neutral to avoid making it seem like criticism. Old habits. Arya drained her canteen, welcomed the cold water's burn. 8 years of hypervigilance doesn't switch off easily. Takes time. Cole settled onto the bench beside her, close enough for camaraderie but far enough to not crowd. I used to sleep with knife under my pillow for 5 years after coming here. Liam finally sat me down and explained that healing meant accepting you were safe even when instincts screamed otherwise. And did you accept it eventually? Cole's grin carried self-awareness. Still wake up ready to fight sometimes, but frequency decreased when I stopped expecting betrayal from people who'd proven trustworthy. Your mate's one of the good ones, you know. Dante doesn't play political games with lives or use loyalty as currency. He's just decent, rare quality in kings. Arya didn't respond immediately, uncomfortable with conversations that pushed toward acknowledging feelings she hadn't fully processed. The mate bond hummed beneath awareness, golden warmth that had become constant companion, and ignoring it required active effort that grew more difficult daily. I don't know how to trust like that anymore. Her admission surprised her vulnerability, emerging without permission. Everyone I've trusted ended up dead or disappeared or proved they were using me. Easier to stay self-sufficient. Easier, sure. Cole's voice softened with understanding. But easier isn't always better. Sometimes the hard thing letting people in, accepting help, building connections, that's what makes survival worth the effort. Before Arya could formulate response, Sarah appeared in the training yard entrance, her expression carrying urgency that bypassed courtesy. We've got situation. Intel team just reported back from Montana surveillance. Marcus's supply depot was hit last night. Weapons cache destroyed. Someone beat us to it. The War Council reconvened in controlled chaos, everyone processing implications of unexpected development. Aerial reconnaissance confirmed Sarah's report depot area had identified was smoking rubble guards dead, and enough evidence scattered to indicate professional operation executed with precision and speed. The attack bore hallmarks of military special operations rather than random raiders, which raised questions nobody wanted to answer. Who has capability to pull that off? Silas Hawalis voiced what others were thinking, suspicion evident in every syllable. Convenient timing that intelligence comes from her and suddenly facilities start exploding. Arya bit back the defensive response that surged up, forced herself to think tactically rather than emotionally. She hadn't ordered any strikes, hadn't communicated with anyone outside ironclad territory, but explaining that required they believe her trust she hadn't yet established with traditional faction members who viewed her as dangerous outsider. Could be allied pact taking initiative. Liam studied the reconnaissance photos spread across the table. We shared some intelligence with border territories as part of coalition building. One of them might have decided to act independently. Or it's trap. Sarah's tactical mind worked through scenarios eliminating impossibilities to find probabilities. Marcus discovers we're aware of his operations stages attack on his own facilities to make us think someone else is involved. We investigate, walk into a prepared ambush. He gets justification for immediate assault. Dante remains silent, pale blue eyes distant with thought processes Arya was learning to recognize. The Alpha King processed information differently than others, saw patterns and connections that required explaining to people who thought more linearly. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of decision already made. Send verification team to 2 other locations Arya identified. If they're also hit, we know someone's running coordinated operation. If they're intact, we assume this was isolated incident and adjust planning accordingly. Meanwhile, we accelerate our own preparations. If this was Marcus's trap or someone else's intervention, either scenario means timelines compressed. The meeting dissolved into action items, everyone moving to execute assignments that would reveal whether mysterious depot destruction represented opportunity or crisis. Arya remained at the periphery, watching organizational efficiency that resulted from years of training and trust from warriors who'd fought together long enough to anticipate needs without extensive communication. Dante found her after the room emptied. His approach signaled far enough in advance that she'd steeled herself for conversation she'd been avoiding. He stopped at respectful distance, gave her space to control the interaction, but his expression carried concern that transcended tactical considerations. Talk to me. What's going through your head right now? Arya weighed responses, discarded comfortable lies in favor of uncomfortable truth. That was my intelligence that got acted on. If it was allied pack, I contributed to an action I didn't authorize. If it was Marcus's trap, I walked into manipulation. Either way, I'm responsible for consequences I didn't intend and can't control. That's new territory. Welcome to leadership. Dante's words carried hard-earned wisdom. Every decision creates ripples you can't predict or manage. The question isn't whether unintended consequences emerge, but whether you can live with them when they do. How do you live with them? Badly most nights. Dante moved to the window, stared out at mountains that held his kingdom and all the lives depending on his decisions. I second-guess everything, replay scenarios, trying to find better choices, carry the weight of people who died following my orders. But I keep leading anyway because the alternative paralysis from fear of mistakes gets more people killed than decisive action with occasional errors. That's bleak comfort. Wasn't trying to comfort you. Dante turned back to face her, and something in his expression suggested he was done with careful distance and political correctness. You want comforting words about how everything works out and decisions become clear and leading is a noble calling. Find someone else. I'll give you truth. Leadership is weight that never lifts responsibility, that never ends, and knowledge that your choices determine whether people live or die. It's awful. But it's also necessary because someone has to carry it, and I'd rather be the one making hard calls than subject to someone else's bad judgment. Why tell me this? Because you're my mate, because you're becoming part of my inner circle, whether you've accepted the bond yet, and because pretending leadership is anything except brutal necessity does you no favors. Dante's voice softened fractionally without losing its edge. You survived 8 years through tactical awareness and adaptive strategy. Apply those skills to politics and you'll navigate this successfully. But don't expect easy answers or moral clarity. They don't exist at this level. The honesty affected Arya more than reassurance could have felt, like Dante was treating her as equal, capable of handling truth rather than fragile thing requiring careful management. She'd spent 8 years trusting no one, and here was an Alpha King offering not promises of perfection, but acknowledgement of complexity. Before she could respond, Cole burst through the door with energy that suggested sprinting from training yards. His expression carried a mix of excitement and concern that immediately set everyone's nerves on edge. 3 more facilities hit, simultaneously. All locations Arya identified, all destroyed within same 2-hour window. Whoever's doing this has resources, coordination, and access to our intelligence. The implications settled heavy. This wasn't random action or Marcus's manipulation. This was coordinated campaign by unknown actor with professional capabilities and direct access to Ironclad's intelligence networks, which meant either betrayal from within or surveillance, they hadn't detected both possibilities carrying catastrophic risk. Lockdown protocols. Dante's command came instant tactical mind engaging without hesitation. Full security sweep communication blackout, except encrypted channels, and I want every person with access to that intelligence accounted for and interrogated. Someone either leaked or is actively working against us, and we find them now. The fortress transformed within minutes, warriors executing lockdown procedures with practiced efficiency that spoke of regular drills and institutional paranoia. Arya found herself swept into the security response, her outsider status making her simultaneously suspect and valuable suspect because she was unknown quantity valuable, because 8 years of intelligence work meant she recognized tradecraft others might miss. They found the evidence 3 hours into the investigation hidden in Elder Silas's nephew's quarters. Financial records showing deposits that exceeded legitimate income, communication logs connecting to known Marcus operatives, and detailed information about Ironclad's defensive preparations. Finn, 25 years old and rising fast through warrior ranks, had been selling intelligence for 6 months in exchange for promises of beta position in Marcus's new order. The arrest happened in the training yard before assembled pack public display designed to demonstrate that betrayal carried consequences regardless of family connections. Finn stood defiant, even in chains, his youth evident in the way he mistook ideological righteousness for wisdom earned through experience. "You're weak, Dante," Finn's voice carried across the assembled warriors, conviction making him bold despite circumstances. "Marcus is strong, takes what he wants, doesn't apologize for having power. That's real alpha behavior, not this democracy theater you're playing. Strength without justice is tyranny." Arya spoke before Dante could respond, her voice cutting through murmurs with authority earned through recent trials. "I've seen Marcus's strength up close. Watched him cage innocents, force them to fight for entertainment, build empire on suffering of people who couldn't defend themselves. That's not strength, that's cowardice disguised as dominance. You're nobody." Finn's sneer carried contempt. "White Wolf doesn't make you wise, just makes you valuable as breeding stock. You don't understand what leadership requires. I understand survival requires more than power." Arya moved forward, positioned herself where every wolf could see her clearly. "Your precious Marcus runs fighting rings where prisoners are tortured to death for crowds' amusement. He traffics slaves, murders innocents, and profits from suffering. That's the strength you admire. That's the leadership you want." She turned to address the assembled pack, directly channeling 8 years of rage into words that carried more weight than any physical blow. "Real strength is protecting people weaker than yourself. Real power is choosing mercy when vengeance would be easier. Real leadership is standing for something beyond personal gain, even when it costs you. Dante Ironclad does that every day. He's not perfect, makes mistakes, carries weight of decisions that never get easier. But he tries. He actually tries to be worthy of the power he holds, to use it for something beyond his own benefit. That matters. That's the difference between king and tyrant." The silence that followed felt electric, hundreds of wolves processing words that challenged assumptions many hadn't examined. Finn opened his mouth to respond, found nothing to say that could counter truth delivered with conviction she'd paid for through 8 years of surviving tyrants who wore various faces. Dante stepped forward, his presence commanding attention without requiring theatrics. "Finn's betrayal endangered everyone here. Standard punishment is death swift, final, and serving as deterrent to others considering similar actions. But I'm not my father. I won't build kingdom on fear and corpses. So here's my judgment. Exile. You have until sunset to leave Ironclad territory. If you return, then you die. Choose your next steps carefully." The mercy shocked Finn more than execution would have his expression, cycling through disbelief and something that might have been shame before settling on stubborn defiance. "You'll regret this. Marcus will crush you, take your kingdom, and mount your pelt beside your grandfather's trophies." "Maybe." Dante's tone suggested he'd considered that possibility and accepted the risk. "But I'll face that outcome having remained the man I chose to be, rather than becoming the monster circumstance demanded. Take your chances with Marcus's mercy once you outlive your usefulness to him." Guards escorted Finn away along with 6 others the investigation had identified as co-conspirators. The crowd dispersed slowly, conversation building as wolves processed the spectacle they'd witnessed. Arya felt the weight of their attention, recognition that she'd spoken with authority and conviction that couldn't be dismissed as mate bond obligation. Liam appeared at her elbow, his scarred face carrying approval he rarely expressed verbally. That speech would have made your Marine instructor proud, gave them something to believe in beyond tactical necessity. I just said what needed saying. Arya deflected the praise, uncomfortable with attention that felt unearned. Someone had to explain why mercy isn't weakness. You chose to be that someone, which makes it earned. Liam's observation came matter of fact. Dante needs people willing to speak truth when comfortable silence would be easier. You're becoming one of those people, whether you plan for it or not. After he departed, Arya stood alone in the emptying yard, processing truth she'd been avoiding. She'd integrated into this pack, had become invested in its survival, had positioned herself to influence decisions and defend its values. 8 years of deliberate isolation were ending not through conscious choice, but through gradual accumulation of connections, impossible to maintain while claiming independence. Dante found her there as sunset painted mountains in shades of amber and gold, his approach unhurried and signaled far enough in advance she couldn't claim surprise. He stood beside her in comfortable silence, both watching light fade and darkness gather, the daily reminder that time passed, whether humans acknowledged it or not. You didn't have to defend me publicly. His words came quiet observation rather than complaint. Yes, I did. Arya kept her gaze on the horizon, found it easier to speak truth while not making eye contact. Because Finn was wrong about strength and leadership, and someone needed to explain that publicly so others understood the difference. You rule through justice, not domination. That matters. Does it matter enough that you're reconsidering the mate bond? The question landed with weight Arya had anticipated and dreaded equally. The mate bond had grown stronger over weeks of proximity and shared purpose. Golden warmth that pulsed beneath awareness constantly. Now connection impossible to ignore, despite years of practiced, emotional distance. She'd felt it during training, when Dante demonstrated techniques during councils, when his tactical mind solved problems others couldn't see, during quiet moments, when exhaustion broke down walls she'd maintained through discipline alone. I don't know. Her honesty surprised, her vulnerability emerging without permission. I'm not who I was 8 years ago when my family died. That girl believed in pacts and trust and permanent connections. I've become someone who survives alone because trusting others proved fatal. Accepting the mate bond means surrendering independence. I've maintained through discipline and sacrifice. That's terrifying. What if independence isn't freedom, but just another cage? Dante finally looked at her pale blue eyes reflecting sunset's dying light. What if connection isn't weakness, but strength you've been denying yourself because trauma taught you the wrong lessons? Or what if opening myself to bond means losing the edge that's kept me alive? What if I become someone who depends on you and then you or betray him at your to prove you're like everyone else who disappointed me? Arya's voice cracked fractionally despite efforts at control. I've survived by trusting nothing except my own capabilities. Asking me to trust someone else after 8 years is asking me to become vulnerable in ways I've spent nearly a decade eliminating. Dante absorbed her words without attempting immediate rebuttal, seemed to understand that some arguments required time to process rather than immediate response. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight of lived experience rather than theoretical platitudes. I can't promise I won't die. Leadership means accepting mortality risk daily. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes or disappoint you. I'm human enough that failure is inevitable. What I can promise is intention. I will try every day to be worthy of your trust, to protect you, support you, give you space to be whoever you need to be while offering partnership when you're ready. The mate bond doesn't require you to surrender independence. It offers chance to build something stronger than either of us could maintain alone. Before Arya could respond, Sarah appeared in the yard entrance, moving with urgency that bypassed courtesy. Her expression carried grim news, the kind that changed everything, and demanded immediate response. Scout team just reported back. Marcus's army is moving. Not in 6 weeks, not next month now. They're 3 days from our border with full force deployment. 600 fighters, siege equipment, and coordination suggesting they know about Finn's capture and our accelerating timeline. The war room transformed into nerve center for coordinated defense maps updated hourly as scouts reported Marcus's advance. 600 fighters moving with military precision through mountain passes, their route calculated to hit Ironclad's weakest defensive position, eastern approach, where terrain favored attackers and traditional fortifications had crumbled during last season's earthquakes. 3 days until contact meant 72 hours to prepare positions, recall scattered patrols and position forces, where they'd inflict maximum casualties while minimizing exposure. Dante stood at the strategic table surrounded by his command staff, pale blue eyes, tracking troop movements with focus that bypassed exhaustion. Liam anchored his right side, Sarah his left, both veterans radiating grim determination that came from surviving battles younger warriors only studied. Arya occupied position, slightly apart, close enough to observe, but separated by invisible boundary marking her outsider status despite weeks of integration. We've got 400 warriors here, 200 more arriving from allied territories within 48 hours. Beta Liam's finger traced defensive lines across topographic maps showing elevation changes and choke points. Standard doctrine says we fortify these ridges, force them to attack uphill into prepared positions, bleed their advance until numerical advantage erodes. Marcus knows our doctrine. Dante's observation came flat, stating obvious problem everyone recognized but hadn't voiced. He's studied every engagement we've fought for the past decade, knows our playbook as well as we do. Traditional defense gives him exactly the battle he's prepared for. Then we don't give him traditional defense. Arya spoke before conscious thought caught up with instinct, tactical mind engaging problems. The way her Marine instructor had trained, identify what enemy expects, do something else, exploit assumptions that become vulnerabilities. You've got terrain advantage, but he's counting on that. What if you surrender the eastern approach entirely, let him commit forces to attacking position? You've abandoned, then hit flanks once he's overextended. The silence that followed felt charged with evaluation, command staff processing radical departure from established doctrine. Sarah studied the maps with renewed attention, seeing possibilities, unconventional tactics opened. Risky. We'd be giving up prepared defensive positions, betting everything on flanking maneuver, succeeding before his main force reaches the fortress. If timing's off by even an hour, they roll through abandoned defenses, and we're fighting uphill battle in reverse. Every option's risky at this point. Arya moved to the table, traced alternative routes that avoided obvious choke points. Marcus brought siege equipment because he expects fortress defense. What if the fortress isn't where you make your stand? What if you engage him in terrain that negates his equipment advantage and forces close quarters combat, where your warrior's superior training matters more than his numerical edge? Liam's scarred face carried calculation, decades of combat experience, evaluating proposal against lived reality of battlefield chaos. You're describing guerrilla warfare. Hit and fade force them to spread out, hunting us pick off isolated units while avoiding decisive engagement. Old school ranger tactics from Border Wars era? Exactly. Arya met his gaze directly, refusing to back down from the weight of his experience. You can't match his numbers in conventional battle, but you don't need to. You need to make this so costly, so bloody, so exhausting that his fighters start questioning whether Marcus's promises are worth dying for. Break their will before you break their lines. Dante absorbed the tactical discussion, his expression revealing nothing, while his mind worked through implications and complications. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of command decision that would determine whether hundreds lived or died. Modified version. We don't abandon the eastern approach completely. We make it look defended with skeleton force enough presence to convince Marcus we're following traditional playbook. Main strength positions for flanking assault exactly as Arya suggests. When Marcus commits to attacking what he thinks is our primary defense, we hit him from 3 sides simultaneously and turn his advantage into killing ground. The plan crystallized through rapid discussion, command staff contributing expertise that refined broad strokes into executable operation. Cole would lead the skeleton defense, 20 warriors tasked with looking like 200 through movement and noise discipline. Sarah's archers would position on overlooking ridges, providing covering fire, while remaining mobile enough to reposition as battle developed. Liam would command the primary flanking force, 80 veterans whose experience made them worth 3 times their number in conventional engagement. And Arya would lead elite guard strike team with specific mission, penetrate Marcus's command structure, during battle chaos eliminate or capture Reed, and extract intelligence about remaining conspiracy networks before they could rebuild. You're putting her in the most dangerous position on the battlefield. Liam's objection came private after formal planning concluded, his voice pitched low enough only Dante could hear clearly. She's your mate, symbolic legitimacy of your rule according to the prophecy, and you're sending her on assassination mission behind enemy lines. She's also the most qualified person for that mission, has personal stake that ensures motivation, and would probably kill me if I tried to bench her for protection. Dante's response carried resignation more than conviction. I can't treat her differently than any other warrior just because the mate bond complicates things emotionally. The mate bond complicates things politically. You die, kingdom mourns and moves on. She dies, prophecy says your claim to rule becomes contested and we face potential civil war during worst possible moment. Liam's brutal honesty cut through emotional considerations to expose strategic reality. I'm not saying protect her because you care, though you do. I'm saying protect her because losing her destabilizes everything in ways we can't afford. Noted. Dante's tone suggested discussion was ending, whether resolved or not. Past movement orders to unit commanders begin positioning forces at 2300 hours tonight. I want everyone in place 12 hours before Marcus reaches engagement range. After Liam departed, Dante stood alone with maps that represented lives about to be risked on decisions he'd made. The weight settled familiar across shoulders that had carried it for 10 years, burden that never lightened regardless of how many times he bore it successfully. Leadership meant accepting that people died following your orders, that tactical necessity sometimes demanded sacrifices that haunted dreams for years afterward, that being right strategically didn't eliminate guilt when body counts finalized. Arya found him there as midnight approached her presence, announced by deliberate footsteps that gave him time to compose himself before turning to face her. She'd changed into combat gear that spoke of careful preparation, functional clothing, without unnecessary bulk weapons, positioned for quick access, hair braided tight to prevent interference during close quarters fighting. Liam thinks sending me on the Reed mission is mistake. Her words came statement rather than question observation, delivered without accusation. Liam thinks protecting assets that provide strategic value is more important than respecting their autonomy and capabilities. Dante moved away from the table, created space for conversation that didn't happen across maps marking where people would die. He's not wrong from pure tactical standpoint, but he's also not accounting for variables that don't fit neatly into strategic doctrine. Like the fact that I'll go after Reed regardless of whether you authorize the mission. Like that, yes. Dante allowed himself a tired smile. You've spent 8 years hunting him, gathered intelligence that brought you to Marcus's facility, and survived 4 months in conditions that would have broken most people. Pretending you'll accept being sidelined when opportunity finally presents itself would be stupidity on my part. Better I integrate your objective into operational planning than have you go rogue and compromise both missions. Practical leadership. Arya's tone carried something that might have been approval. Most alphas would try to lock me down for my own protection. Most alphas are idiots who confuse dominance displays with actual leadership. Dante closed distance between them, fractionally not crowding, but making the conversation intimate rather than professional. I need you to understand something before battle begins. If circumstances force choice between completing mission and staying alive, I need you to choose survival. Reed's not worth dying for. Revenge isn't worth your life. Nothing is worth losing you. The mate bond flared between them, golden warmth surging with intensity that made Arya's breath catch. She'd felt it building over weeks, connection growing stronger through shared purpose and proximity. But Dante's words pushed past intellectual acknowledgement into emotional territory she'd avoided through discipline and fear. You can't ask me to abandon 8 years of purpose right before I finally get resolution. I'm not asking you to abandon it, I'm asking you to survive it. Dante's voice dropped lower, carrying vulnerability he rarely showed. I've lost people. Too many people in too many stupid ways that could have been prevented if they'd prioritized staying alive over completing objectives. I won't lose you the same way, especially not when you matter beyond tactical considerations or political symbolism. Because of the mate bond, because you're extraordinary regardless of the bond, because you've proven yourself through actions rather than bloodline, because watching you integrate into this pack, seeing you challenge assumptions and speak truth that others avoid, has been a reminder that leadership doesn't require cruelty and strength doesn't require dominance. Dante paused, seeming to wrestle with words that didn't come easily. Because I'm falling for you in ways that transcend supernatural connection, and losing you would break something I'm not sure could be repaired. Arya felt walls she'd maintained for 8 years crack under pressure of honesty delivered without expectation of reciprocation. Dante wasn't demanding she accept the mate. Bond wasn't leveraging political power or supernatural connection to force vulnerability she wasn't ready to give. He was simply stating truth and accepting that she might not be ready to hear it. I don't know how to do this. Her admission emerged raw, stripped of defensive mechanisms that usually protected her from emotional exposure. 8 years alone taught me that caring about people meant watching them die, or disappoint me, or prove they were using me all along. Opening myself to you means accepting that vulnerability might destroy me if this goes wrong. It might. Dante acknowledged the fear without trying to minimize it. I can't promise perfect safety or guaranteed happy ending. What I can promise is that I'll fight for us every day, that I'll respect your autonomy, even when it terrifies me, that I'll be honest when easier lies would smooth over difficult moments. The mate bond gives us foundation, but we build everything else through choice and effort. Before Arya could respond, Cole's voice echoed through the corridor outside, urgency, overriding protocols about disturbing command staff during planning phases. His appearance in the doorway carried news written across features too expressive to hide bad information. Marcus accelerated again. They're moving through night instead of camping. New timeline puts them at engagement range by dawn tomorrow instead of 3 days out. We've got 8 hours to finalize positions. The preparation that should have unfolded across 72 hours compressed into frantic 8-hour sprint warriors moving through darkness to reach positions before light exposed them. Arya ran beside elite guard toward infiltration staging area, her breath fogging and mountain-cold legs burning from pace that pushed human endurance limits. Around her, 15 warriors maintained formation, their movements synchronized through training and trust breathing, steady despite exertion. They reached the designated rally point 2 hours before dawn, rocky outcropping that overlooked the valley where Marcus's forces would advance. Below, campfires marked enemy positions, hundreds of flickering points, suggesting military organization rather than ragtag mercenaries. Marcus had built army that moved with discipline, that followed orders, that represented genuine threat rather than theatrical posturing. Sarah appeared from shadows with update based on final scout reports. Marcus' position read in the command element, central location, where he's coordinating artillery and siege equipment deployment. You'll need to penetrate 3 defensive rings to reach him: outer perimeter pickets, inner guard detail, and immediate command staff protection. Figure 30 hostiles between your position and target. 30 to 15 are decent odds if we're smart about it. Arya studied the terrain, identifying approach routes that balance speed against exposure. We go in during the main assault, use battle chaos as cover, surgical extraction, rather than fighting through sequentially. The plan was sound in theory, would probably work if execution was perfect and luck favored them. Combat rarely unfolded according to plan, which meant adaptability mattered more than detailed preparation, meant warriors survived by reading situations faster than opponents and adjusting tactics in real time. Dawn broke with crystalline clarity, mountain sunrise painting snow-capped peaks in shades of rose and gold, before harsh light revealed battlefield reality. Marcus's army advanced in 3 columns, their formation suggesting professional military planning rather than pack warfare traditions. 600 fighters moving with purpose, siege equipment rolling on massive wheels, artillery pieces positioned to bombard fortress walls from range that prevented effective counterattack. Cole's skeleton force engaged first 20 warriors, making noise and movement that suggested 200 arrows and harassment fire designed to draw Marcus's attention toward eastern approach. The enemy took the bait, committed 200 fighters to crushing what they perceived as primary defense, their advance confident and overwhelming. Then Liam's flanking force struck from concealed positions on both sides, 80 veterans, hitting exposed flanks with coordinated precision that turned confident advance into desperate defense. Silver weapons flashed in morning sun, warriors fell screaming, and the neat military formations dissolved into chaotic melee, where individual skill mattered more than numerical advantage. Arya led elite guard into the chaos, using battle confusion as cover for infiltration toward command element. They moved like surgical knife through butter, engaging only when necessary, bypassing fights that didn't advance their mission. 5 enemies died in their wake, quick, inefficient kills that prevented alarm from spreading bodies left behind, as testimony that something predatory moved through Marcus's army. The command element occupied elevated position overlooking battle. Marcus himself visible directing operations while Reed coordinated artillery fire. 20 guards maintained perimeter professional soldiers who'd survived enough combat to recognize threats and respond appropriately. Penetrating that cordon would require distraction or overwhelming force, neither option available to 15 warrior team already deep in enemy territory. Arya signaled her team to hold position, studied guard patterns, waited for opportunity that might never come. Around them, the larger battle raged with savage intensity, ironclad warriors executing Dante's tactical plan with precision that suggested years of training, paying dividends. Marcus's numerical advantage was eroding his casualties, mounting faster than sustainable. But the outcome remained uncertain enough that command staff maintained focus on battle management rather than rear security. The opportunity came from unexpected direction. One of Marcus's artillery pieces exploded spectacularly, either sabotage or mechanical failure, and the detonation drew every eye toward the fireball blooming orange against morning sky. In that moment of distracted attention, elite guard moved. They hit the perimeter like thunderstorm overwhelming guards before alarm could spread silver weapons, finding vulnerable points with efficiency that spoke of countless training hours. Arya led the charge toward Reed, her focus narrowing to target she'd hunted for 8 years. Revenge and justice and closure finally within reach after a lifetime of pursuit. Reed saw her coming, recognition flashing across features that had haunted her nightmares since she was 20 years old. He was older than her memory suggested, gray threading through hair that had been solid brown when he'd killed her family, scars marking face and arms from decades of hunting wolves for profit. His eyes held cold calculation of career predator, evaluating threat and weighing options. The white wolf pup that got away. Reed's voice carried across diminishing distance between them, conversational despite circumstances. Should have died with your pack 8 years ago. Would have saved us all considerable trouble. Why did you kill them? Arya closed the gap, weapons ready, but restrained, needing answers before violence. They weren't bothering anyone, weren't threatening humans, just existed peacefully in territory they'd occupied for generations. Why hunt them to extinction? Because your grandfather killed my brother 40 years ago. Reed's admission came matter-of-fact, old wound delivered without particular emotion. Territory dispute completely legal, by pack law, justified killing. But my brother still died, and I spent 4 decades making every white wolf I could find pay for that death. Your family was just continuation of project that's consumed my adult life. So you murdered innocents for revenge that had nothing to do with them. Arya felt rage building, 8 years of contained fury demanding release. Children who'd never known your brother, who had no connection to his death except sharing bloodline with someone who defended territory legally. Revenge doesn't require justification to those not receiving it. Reed shrugged, apparently unbothered by moral implications. I wanted white wolves extinct. I had resources to make that happen, so I did. Simple as that. The honesty was somehow worse than elaborate justification would have been, revealed Reed as man who'd committed genocide for personal vendetta without troubling himself about ethics or proportionality. Arya had spent 8 years imagining this confrontation, had rehearsed speeches and demands, had believed confronting her family's killer would provide closure that made suffering worthwhile. Instead, she felt empty, recognized that Reed was just broken human who'd turned trauma into violence and never questioned whether his actions were defensible. Killing him wouldn't bring her family back, wouldn't erase 8 years of hardship, wouldn't fill the hollowness that revenge-focused existence had carved into her center. You're pathetic. Arya's words came from someplace beyond rage, from exhausted clarity that saw Reed clearly for first time. You spent 40 years destroying lives because you couldn't process grief appropriately, and now you're just old hunter working for tyrant because nobody else would hire you. That's your legacy, wasted life, pursuing meaningless revenge that accomplished nothing except spreading suffering. Reed's expression shifted, something like shame flickering across features before defensive anger replaced it. You think you're better. You spent 8 years tracking me for exact same reason. The difference is I'm stopping. Arya lowered her weapon's conscious choice made in a moment of absolute clarity. I could kill you right now, probably should, from pure justice standpoint, but that would make me the same as you, someone who prioritizes revenge over becoming a better person. So instead, you're going to stand trial, face every family you destroyed and answer for every murder, spend whatever life remains in prison, knowing you failed completely, and your brother's death was meaningless waste. Before Reed could respond, Marcus's roar echoed across Battlefield Alpha Command that cut through combat chaos with supernatural force. His massive form crashed through his own guards toward the command element, having apparently noticed infiltration team and abandoned battle management to protect his military advisor. Arya turned to face Marcus, prepared to defend position, but movement from her peripheral vision resolved into Dante, arriving from opposite direction. The Alpha King had apparently tracked her team's infiltration, had positioned himself to provide backup, and now stood between her and Marcus with expression that promised violence to anyone threatening his mate. The confrontation that followed happened in compressed time, Alphas clashing with supernatural force that shook ground beneath combatants' feet. Marcus was powerful, decades of dominance displays and casual violence, creating aura that pressed against consciousness like physical weight. But Dante was precise, moved with economy, that suggested he'd evolved beyond needing dominance displays to prove capability, fought with tactical awareness that made every action serve strategic purpose. They fought through the command element, destroyed expensive equipment, scattered guards who'd survived elite guard assault. Around them, the larger battle tilted decisively toward ironclad forces. Marcus's army breaking as casualties mounted beyond sustainable levels, and warriors began surrendering rather than dying for leader who'd abandoned them to chase personal objectives. Marcus recognized defeat approaching, made desperate lunge toward Arya, apparently calculating that killing prophesied White Wolf would destabilize Dante's rule even if battle was lost. He never reached her. Dante intercepted with speed that defied his size, drove Marcus to ground with impact that cracked stone, and in a moment of crystalline clarity drove silver blade through his opponent's chest with precision that bypassed ribs to find heart directly. Marcus died, gurgling, rage eyes locked on Dante with hatred that persisted beyond consciousness fading. His death rippled through remaining fighters, supernatural awareness of Alpha's passing spreading through pack bonds that survived distance and chaos. Within minutes, organized resistance collapsed Marcus's army, surrendering en masse to ironclad forces that had bled for every meter of ground. The battle was over. 4 hours of savage combat that left hundreds dead or wounded, valley floors soaked with blood, survivors too exhausted to feel victory beyond immediate relief at having survived. Arya stood amid carnage, holding Reed in custody. Her 8-year quest concluded in ways she'd never anticipated, revenge abandoned in favor of justice that felt more substantial than violence could provide. Dante found her there as medics began triage work that would consume days. His armor was dented and blood-stained, exhaustion written across features that carried weight of command decisions that had determined who lived and died, but his eyes held relief that transcended tactical victory. "You're alive," his words came, simple statement of fact that carried more emotional weight than elaborate speeches could manage. "So are you." Arya met his gaze, directly acknowledged truth she'd been avoiding through fear and learned wariness. "I was terrified you'd die protecting me, that I'd lose you right when I'd started believing connection was possible, that opening myself to the mate bond would result in exactly the pain I'd spent 8 years avoiding. But I didn't die." Dante closed distance between them, raised one blood-stained hand to cup her face with gentleness that contrasted his appearance. "And you didn't abandon your mission for safety, and we're both standing here having survived battle that could have killed either of us. Maybe that suggests we're stronger together than fear predicts. Maybe it does." Arya leaned into his touch, conscious choice to accept vulnerability she'd rejected for 8 years. The mate bond surged between them, golden warmth flooding through chest and spreading outward until exhaustion and pain faded beneath certainty that felt like coming home after an impossible journey. "I accept the bond. I accept you. I accept that being vulnerable with the right person is strength, rather than weakness." Dante's kiss answered her declaration, gentle despite circumstances' promise, sealed without requiring words that would have felt inadequate anyway. Around them, the warriors began cheering recognition, spreading through pack that their Alpha King had claimed his mate publicly, and she'd accepted that prophecy was fulfilled and legitimacy was secured, that they'd survived not just battle but political crisis that could have destroyed kingdom regardless of military outcome. The aftermath unfolded across weeks of recovery and reconstruction, battlefield cleanup and prisoner processing and diplomatic negotiations that determined post-war order. Reed stood trial before counsel, representing every pack his actions had affected, faced testimony from survivors and family members of victims, received sentence of life imprisonment in facility designed to hold supernatural criminals. He accepted judgment without protest, apparently recognizing that fighting would accomplish nothing except extending suffering. Marcus's former army integrated into ironclad forces through rehabilitation program, Arya designed based on her own experience surviving systems designed to break people. Not every fighter accepted the offer, some chose exile rather than serving the king they'd fought, but enough stayed that Ironclad emerged from conflict stronger rather than depleted despite casualties sustained. Allied pacts sent representatives to observe tribunals and treaty negotiations, their presence testament that Dante's vision of cooperative governance, rather than domination-based hierarchy, was spreading throughout mountain territories. The United Pact Council formed during those weeks revolutionary framework that replaced traditional territorial conflicts with collective defense and shared justice systems. Arya stood before that first council meeting 3 months after battle, no longer prisoner or outsider, but Luna recognized by every represented pack. She wore silver and white that honored her bloodline without defining her completely crown of platinum, marking her position while leaving identity intact. The speech she delivered addressed prisoner rights rehabilitation rather than punishment for nonviolent offenses and protection for vulnerable populations that traditional pack hierarchy had ignored or exploited. The proposals passed with overwhelming support, reforms implemented across Allied territories. Within months, foundations laid for society that protected rather than consumed those lacking power. Marcus's fighting rings were dismantled, prisoners freed, and provided resources to rebuild lives, and legislation passed that made such operations capital offenses carrying death penalty regardless of perpetrator's status. Dante watched from his throne beside hers, pride evident in expression that suggested he'd known she would change kingdom from the moment he'd claimed her in blood-soaked arena. Their formal bonding ceremony had occurred weeks earlier. Traditional vows spoken before witnesses from every allied packmate, bond completed with blood ritual that sealed their union permanently. The celebration had lasted 3 days, unprecedented gathering that marked not just royal wedding, but symbolic beginning of new era. That evening, alone in quarters they now shared, Arya stood at windows overlooking kingdom that had somehow become home, despite every instinct that screamed permanent attachment was dangerous fantasy. Dante joined her there, wrapping arms around her from behind, and they watched sunset paint mountains in shades of amber and crimson, while darkness gathered in valleys below. "Do you regret it?" His question came soft, vulnerability evident, despite months of partnership that had proven itself through crisis and conflict. Accepting the bond, becoming Luna, taking on responsibilities you never asked for. Arya considered carefully before responding, wanted to answer truthfully rather than offering comfortable platitudes. "Some days, when politics gets exhausting, or when I remember how much simpler life was when I only had to keep myself alive. But mostly no. Mostly I recognize that what I had before wasn't living, it was just surviving with purpose. This is living. Complicated, frustrating, occasionally terrifying, but living in ways I'd forgotten were possible." She turned in his arms to face him directly, saw mate who'd proven himself through actions rather than words, partner who challenged her to be better while accepting her exactly as she was. "They threw me in that arena expecting me to die quickly and quietly. Instead, I shifted, you claimed me, and now I'm queen, helping rewrite laws across multiple territories." That's either universe's cruelest joke or evidence that sometimes impossible things happen for reasons we don't understand until we're standing in aftermath evaluating what we built from ruins. I prefer the second interpretation. Dante's smile carried warmth that had become familiar over months of partnership. Though I'll admit the universe has twisted sense of humor about how it brings mates together. The next morning brought news that would reshape their immediate future. One of Marcus's former lieutenants had escaped custody and was reportedly building coalition of traditionalist pacts opposed to reformed governance structures. The threat was real, would require attention and resources, but facing it felt different than previous crises. Arya wasn't alone anymore, wasn't carrying weight of survival as solitary burden, wasn't fighting battles with nothing except determination and skills learned through desperation. She had mate, had purpose that extended beyond personal revenge into protecting others from suffering she'd endured. The journey from prisoner to queen had been impossible, traumatic, transformative in ways she was still processing. But standing beside Dante as they reviewed intelligence reports and planned responses to emerging threats, Arya recognized that she'd found something worth surviving for not just safety or revenge or even justice, but connection and community, and chance to build future that honored past suffering by preventing its replication. In the training yard below their windows, Cole ran new recruits through drills, while Sarah supervised advanced tactics instruction. Elena worked in the medical wing, former prisoner turned advocate, helping others navigate trauma that didn't vanish just because circumstances improved. The kingdom functioned through collective effort, through people choosing daily to contribute rather than being forced through dominance displays or fear. This was Dante's vision made manifest, power used to protect rather than control, leadership earned through service rather than intimidation, strength measured by who you lifted up rather than who you conquered. And Arya had become integral to that vision, her voice carrying weight not because of bloodline, but because she'd proven herself through tactical excellence and moral courage that refused to compromise principle for convenience. The white wolf who'd hidden for 8 years had stopped hiding. The prisoner who'd survived through silence had found her voice. The hunter pursuing revenge had chosen justice. And the woman who'd believed connection meant weakness had discovered that true strength came from allowing yourself to be known completely and choosing vulnerability despite risk. 6 months after Marcus's defeat, Arya stood in the memorial garden dedicated to victims of fighting rings and trafficking operations, placing flowers at stones marking those who hadn't survived. Her parents' names were carved there, retrieved from Reed's testimony during trial, finally acknowledged after 8 years of unmarked graves. She knelt before their memorial, felt Dante's presence behind her, offering support without crowding, and whispered words she'd needed to speak for nearly a decade. I survived, like you wanted. But I did more than that. I found family, again found purpose beyond revenge, found way to use what happened to me to prevent others suffering the same fate. You'd be proud. At least I hope you would be. She rose, accepted Dante's offered hand, and together they walked through garden, where light filtered through leaves to pattern ground and shifting shadows. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new responsibilities that came with leadership position she'd never imagined occupying. But tonight she was simply Luna walking with her mate through garden, commemorating those who died so survivors could build better future. The prophecy had claimed the last white wolf rising would secure or shatter the AlphaKing's reign. In the end, it had done both: shattered old order built on domination and fierce secured new order founded on justice and cooperation. Arya hadn't been passive symbol validating someone else's power. She'd been active participant in revolution that transformed kingdom from something merely surviving into something worth defending. Years later, when historians wrote about the transformation of mountain territories from collection of warring packs into united council, they would date the change to battle where Marcus fell. But those who'd lived through it knew that transformation began earlier in blood-soaked arena, where prisoner became mate, and AlphaKing chose mercy over tradition, where two people found each other during worse circumstances and decided to build something better from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Arya had been thrown into fighting ring expecting to die. She'd shifted to survive, been claimed by AlphaKing, who saw past her bloodline to person beneath, and together they'd built kingdom where no one else would face the choice between death and revelation, where surviving meant thriving rather than merely continuing, where power served justice instead of feeding itself. The white wolf ran free now, no longer hiding, no longer afraid, no longer alone. And that made every terrible moment worth enduring, made every scar testament to survival rather than defeat, made every hard choice vindicated by outcome, that honored those who died by protecting those who lived. This was victory, not military triumph or political achievement, but personal transformation, from victim into leader, from survivor into protector, from broken thing, hiding in shadows, into warrior who stood in light and refused to let darkness consume anyone else. They'd thrown her into fighting ring, expecting entertainment. She'd walked out a queen, and that was the best revenge imaginable, not destroying enemies, but becoming too powerful to fear them, too purposeful to be defined by trauma, too connected to ever be truly alone again. The sunset burned crimson across mountain peaks, light fading into darkness that would give way to dawn eternal cycle, suggesting that endings contain beginnings and destruction, created space for growth. Arya watched until stars emerged ancient light that had witnessed countless transformations and felt at peace in ways she'd never imagined possible during those 8 years when survival was victory and tomorrow was never guaranteed. She'd survived, she'd thrived, she'd become someone her parents would have been proud of, someone her Marine instructor would have recognized despite transformation, someone her 20-year-old self wouldn't have believed could exist after trauma shattered certainty. And standing beside mate who'd proven love through actions rather than words, surrounded by pack who'd accepted her as warrior before acknowledging her as Luna, Arya finally allowed herself to believe that safety was real, that trust was possible, that the future held something beyond endless vigilance against threats that never fully materialized. The last white wolf had risen, and in rising she'd helped build kingdom worth defending, life worth living, and legacy worth leaving. That was enough. That was everything.